move now! One moment!
February 14th, 1943. The Kasserine Pass in Tunisia. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox himself, sat in his command tent reviewing intelligence reports with the confidence of a man who had outmaneuvered British forces across North Africa for 2 years. His Africa Corps had just delivered a devastating blow to untested American forces. The road to Allied defeat seemed wide open. But 1,500 miles away, a man Rommel had never faced in battle was studying the same maps, making calculations that would turn the entire North African campaign on its head. Within 24 hours, everything Rommel thought he knew about American capabilities would be shattered. What happened next wasn't just a military reversal, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare, tactical improvisation, and the kind of audacious risk-taking that separates legendary commanders from merely competent ones. The story you're about to hear contains direct quotes from Rommel's personal war diary, intercepted German communications, and post-war testimonies that reveal just how completely one man's genius could dismantle another's carefully constructed plans. You won't find these stories anywhere else. Subscribe now and never miss a new video. Drop a comment below and tell me, what aspect of Patton's tactical genius fascinates you most, or simply let me know where you're watching from. To understand what happened on that single decisive day, we need to rewind 3 weeks earlier. On January 23, 1943, Lieutenant General George S. Patton had just arrived in Morocco to take command of the battered II Corps. The Americans had suffered 6,000 casualties at Kasserine Pass, their first major engagement against German forces. Morale was shattered, equipment was scattered, discipline had collapsed. General Eisenhower's assessment was brutal. The American soldier has not yet learned to hate the enemy. Patton stepped off the plane wearing a custom-designed uniform, 2 ivory-handled revolvers strapped to his waist, and an expression that one staff officer described as a combination of fury and absolute certainty. His first order shocked everyone present. He wasn't going to comfort the troops. He wasn't going to slowly rebuild confidence. He assembled his officers and delivered words that would become legend. I don't want to get any messages saying I'm holding my position. And we're not holding anything. Let the Hun do that. We are advancing constantly. But Patton knew something his officers didn't. He'd been studying Rommel for months, not just his tactics but his psychology, his patterns, his weaknesses. In his personal notes from February the 2nd, Patton wrote, "Rommel is predictable in his unpredictability. He feints, then commits fully where you expect him least. But there's a pattern. He always exploits success too far. That's where I'll break him." Meanwhile, Rommel was planning what he believed would be the killing blow. His diary entry from February 10th reveals his thinking. The Americans lack the stomach for sustained combat. Their equipment is superior, but their leadership is cautious, their coordination poor. One more decisive strike at their center, and Eisenhower will be forced to withdraw from North Africa entirely. The British will stand alone again, and we know how that ends. Rommel had identified what he considered the perfect target: the American positions at Gafsa, a desert town that controlled key supply routes. Intelligence reports suggested minimal American defenses, perhaps 3,000 troops, scattered and demoralized. German intercepts had picked up American radio traffic filled with confusion and requests for reinforcement. Everything pointed to an easy victory that would open a clear path to the coast. What Rommel didn't know was that every piece of intelligence he possessed had been carefully manipulated. Patton had arrived at II Corps headquarters on February 6th and immediately implemented what he called Operation Fabrication. He ordered radio operators to send messages in easily breakable codes, deliberately describing American positions as undermanned and requesting immediate withdrawal authorization. He had dummy vehicles positioned to look like a retreating force. He even staged a fake argument with his logistics officer within earshot of suspected Axis informants in the local population, loudly complaining that, "We don't have the fuel to mount any offensive operations for at least 10 days. Colonel Oscar Koch, Patton's intelligence officer, later testified. The general understood something fundamental. Rommel was brilliant, but he was also arrogant. He expected Americans to be predictable, cautious, and slow to react. Patton gave him exactly what he expected to see, until it was too late to matter. On February 13th, Rommel issued his attack orders. The German 21st Panzer Division, numbering 142 operational tanks and 8,000 veteran troops, would strike at Gafsa at dawn on February 14th. It would be a classic blitzkrieg, rapid penetration, encirclement, and annihilation. The Italian Centauro Division would follow to consolidate gains. Rommel's own notes from that evening reveal his confidence. Tomorrow we break the American center. By week's end we'll have pushed them back 200 kilometers. The desert will do the rest. But that same evening, 400 miles to the west, Patton was finalizing a plan so audacious that when he presented it to his staff, 3 senior officers formally objected. Patton's response was recorded by his aide, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Codman. "Gentlemen, Rommel thinks he's hunting us. Tomorrow morning, he's going to realize he's the prey." Here's what Patton had orchestrated. While appearing to retreat from Gafsa, he had secretly repositioned the entire 1st Armored Division, 390 tanks, in hidden wadis 30 miles southeast of the town. The 1st Infantry Division, 16,000 strong, had moved under cover of darkness to positions that would cut off any German advance. Most brilliantly, Patton had coordinated with British forces to create what he called the hammer and anvil. British artillery units, supposedly engaged elsewhere, had quietly repositioned to create a killing field. The scale of this deception was staggering. Patton had moved over 25,000 troops, 400 tanks, and 200 artillery pieces into attack positions while maintaining the appearance of disorganized retreat. Every movement happened at night. Radio silence was absolute except for the fake transmissions. Even Eisenhower wasn't fully briefed on the plan. Patton knew there were intelligence leaks at the highest levels and trusted no one. February 14th dawned cold and clear across the Tunisian desert. At 0530 hours, German reconnaissance units reported what they expected. Gafsa appeared lightly defended, with signs of recent American evacuation. At 0620 hours, Rommel's panzers began their advance in 3 columns, moving at speed across open terrain. The Desert Fox was with the lead elements, personally directing what he expected to be a triumphant breakthrough. At 6:45 hours, when the German lead tanks were exactly where Patton had predicted they'd be, the entire landscape erupted. American artillery, positioned on 3 sides, opened fire simultaneously. The barrage was so intense that German radio operators described it as unlike anything encountered in the Desert War. Within minutes, 23 German tanks were burning. But this wasn't random defensive fire. This was directed, coordinated devastation designed to channel the German advance into an ever-narrowing corridor. Rommel's immediate response revealed both his tactical genius and his fatal misunderstanding of what he faced. At 0658 hours, intercepted German communications captured his order. "Push through. This is desperation fire from broken units. Maintain speed and break their center." He believed the Americans were throwing everything they had into a last-ditch defense. He couldn't have been more wrong. At 0715 hours, Patton's 1st Armored Division emerged from concealment and slammed into the German southern flank. Not a probing attack, a full-speed assault with 390 tanks in coordinated waves. German tank commander Hans von Luck later wrote, "We had been told the Americans couldn't coordinate armor operations. What hit us that morning was more sophisticated than anything Montgomery had thrown at us. They moved like chess pieces, controlled by a single mind." The transformation of American forces in just 3 weeks was impossible to comprehend. These were the same units that had broken at Kasserine Pass. But Patton had stripped out ineffective officers, promoted aggressive junior commanders, and drilled his forces relentlessly in the exact scenario they now executed. He'd told them, "The Germans think you're cowards. In 1 hour, you're going to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives." At 0742 hours, Rommel realized his mistake. An intercepted transmission captured his words. "We're not fighting retreating Americans. This is a prepared trap. All units, defensive formation. Prepare to withdraw." But Patton had anticipated even this. The moment German forces tried to pull back, the 1st Infantry Division moved forward, cutting off retreat routes. British artillery, positioned at calculated intervals, created a box from which there was no easy escape. Rommel's panzers, designed for mobile warfare in open desert, found themselves in a meat grinder. The battle that Rommel had expected to win in 3 hours stretched into 8 hours of brutal close-quarters combat. By 1400 hours, German casualties were catastrophic. 89 tanks destroyed or captured, over 2,000 casualties, and, most devastating for Rommel, his aura of invincibility shattered. American forces had suffered losses too. 41 tanks destroyed, 670 casualties. But the psychological impact was entirely one-sided. What happened in Rommel's command post that afternoon became the subject of multiple post-war accounts. His chief of staff, General Alfred Gauss, testified. The field marshal was silent for nearly an hour after receiving the full casualty reports. Then he asked for his personal diary. What he wrote I read over his shoulder. It said, "I have underestimated the Americans, not their equipment, their will. Someone has taught them to think like Germans and fight like madmen. Find out who commands them." When Rommel learned that the commander was Patton, his response was recorded by multiple witnesses. He said simply, "Now it makes sense." German intelligence files captured after the war showed that Rommel had been reading about Patton since 1941. His service in World War I, his theories on armored warfare, his reputation for aggressive action. But Rommel had dismissed him as a theorist, not a practitioner. That assessment cost him the battle. But here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. Patton wasn't satisfied with a tactical victory. He understood that wars are won in the minds of commanders as much as on battlefields. That evening, he ordered something unprecedented, a nighttime armored raid on Rommel's own headquarters. At 2030 hours, a specially selected force of 200 men in 40 jeeps and light tanks penetrated German lines using captured passwords obtained from prisoners. Their mission wasn't to kill Rommel, it was to terrify him. They struck the headquarters compound, destroyed communications equipment, captured staff officers, and withdrew before German forces could react. The raid lasted 17 minutes. American casualties, 3 wounded. The psychological impact was immense. Rommel, who had built his reputation on aggressive, unexpected attacks, had been attacked in his own headquarters by the supposedly timid Americans. His diary entry from that night, published after the war, reveals his state of mind. They have learned too quickly. Worse, they have a commander who thinks 3 moves ahead. The Americans are no longer the weak link in the Allied chain. God help us. What makes this story remarkable isn't just the military execution, it's the sheer audacity of Patton's approach. He had taken command of a defeated, demoralized force, and within 21 days had transformed them into a unit that could outfight Rommel's veterans. He'd done it through a combination of brutal discipline, psychological manipulation, and tactical brilliance. Captain Harry Semmes, who served under Patton, later described the transformation. On January 23rd, we were a beaten army. By February 14th, we believed we were invincible. Not because Patton lied to us, but because he made us prove it to ourselves. He predicted exactly what would happen in that battle, and when it happened exactly as he said, we stopped doubting him. More importantly, we stopped doubting ourselves. The numbers from that single day tell the story. German forces suffered 2,247 casualties and lost 89 tanks, representing nearly 30% of their armored strength in Tunisia. American forces captured or destroyed supplies worth an estimated $4.3 million in 1943 dollars. But the strategic impact was far greater. Rommel's offensive momentum, which had driven the Allies back 200 kilometers in previous weeks, stopped dead. He would never again launch a major offensive in North Africa. In Berlin, the reaction to news of the defeat was fury, mixed with disbelief. General Wilhelm Keitel, head of the Wehrmacht High Command, wrote to Rommel, "How is it possible that Rommel, victor of Tobruk, conqueror of British armies, has been defeated by untested Americans in a prepared battle? Explain immediately." Rommel's response was brutally honest. "The Americans have found their general. His name is Patton. We should have killed him when we had the chance in 1918. This reference to 1918 is revealing. Rommel had actually studied Patton's service in World War I, when then-Colonel Patton had led the 1st American tank unit in combat. German after-action reports from the Battle of St. Mihiel had noted Patton's aggressive leadership. But 25 years later, the Germans had assumed that kind of warrior spirit couldn't survive in the bureaucratic American army. They were catastrophically wrong. Over the following weeks, as American forces pushed Rommel's Africa Corps steadily eastward, the Field Marshal's diary entries reveal a man coming to terms with a new reality. On March 3rd, he wrote, "Patton attacks where I would attack. He feints where I would feint. Fighting him is like fighting a mirror image with better supplies. The American soldier who seemed so soft at Kasserine now fights with a confidence that terrifies my veterans." On March 9th, facing encirclement, Rommel was ordered to evacuate North Africa and return to Germany. His final diary entry from Tunisia, dated March 8th, contained this assessment. "We came to Africa to prove German superiority. We leave having proven only that courage and will are not uniquely German traits. The Americans have both in abundance. Their commander, this Patton, has demonstrated that 3 weeks of proper leadership can erase a year of defeats. I pray I never face him again." It's worth noting the human dimension of what happened on February 14th. Rommel wasn't simply outmaneuvered, he was psychologically dismantled. German prisoners captured that day reported that their officers seemed shocked and unable to comprehend what had happened. These were men who had conquered most of North Africa, who had pushed experienced British forces to the brink of defeat. To be outwitted by Americans they'd been taught to see as inferior shook something fundamental in their worldview. Conversely, the American troops experienced a transformation that went beyond mere military success. Private James Crawford, who fought at both Kasserine Pass and in this February 14th battle, wrote home, "3 weeks ago I thought we'd lose this war. Today I know we can't lose. Not because our equipment is better, though it is. Not because we're braver, we're not. But because we finally have a general who understands that winning starts in your head, not your foxhole." The ripple effects of this single day extended far beyond North Africa. When news reached American newspapers in late February, the headlines transformed public perception. "Patton smashes Rommel," declared the New York Times. "Desert Fox outfoxed," announced the Chicago Tribune. The American public, which had been nervously following defeats and stalemates, suddenly had a victory, and more importantly, a hero. Eisenhower, who had been under enormous pressure from Washington to deliver results, sent Patton a terse message on February 15th. "You have given Americans something to celebrate. Don't stop now." Privately, Eisenhower wrote in his diary, "Patton is difficult, egotistical, and impossible to control. He is also exactly what we needed. The Germans now know that Americans can fight, and they know we have commanders who can think. That's worth all of Patton's personality flaws combined." British commanders, initially skeptical of American military capability, reassessed their views. General Bernard Montgomery, not known for generosity toward American generals, wrote to his chief of staff, "This Patton fellow has done something remarkable. He's turned rabble into soldiers in 3 weeks. I don't like his methods, but I cannot argue with his results. If he continues this way, the Americans will reach Berlin before we do." In the German High Command, the implications were debated urgently. If the Americans could produce a commander of Rommel's caliber, and if American soldiers could be transformed so rapidly from defeated troops to effective fighters, what did that mean for the war's outcome? General Heinz Guderian, architect of German Blitzkrieg doctrine, wrote in his assessment, "We have awakened a sleeping giant, and we have given them time to find leaders worthy of their resources. This is the beginning of our end." But perhaps the most revealing reaction came from Rommel himself in a letter to his wife Lucy, dated February 20th. The letter, discovered in archives after the war, shows a side of the Desert Fox rarely seen. "My darling, I have met my match. This American Patton fights with a fury that reminds me of myself 20 years ago. Worse, he has learned from my mistakes. He fights like a German, but with American abundance. I fear what comes next, not for myself, but for our cause. We cannot afford many more days like February 14th. Now let's talk about what military historians say when they analyze this single day decades later. The Battle of Gafsa, as it came to be known, though the fighting ranged across 50 square miles, represents a turning point not just in the North African campaign, but in military history's understanding of leadership impact. Dr. Carlo D'Este, in his biography of Patton, writes, February 14, 1943, demonstrated that elite forces are not born, they are created. Patton took the same men who had broken at Kasserine Pass and, through a combination of discipline, training, and psychological manipulation, turned them into a force capable of defeating Rommel's veterans. The transformation happened in 21 days. That fact alone should revolutionize how we think about military leadership. British military historian Max Hastings offers this assessment. Rommel's defeat at Gafsa revealed the fundamental limitation of individual genius in modern warfare. The Desert Fox was brilliant, but he was operating with limited intelligence, constrained supplies, and political interference from Berlin. Patton had all the advantages of American industrial might, but more importantly, he had the freedom to act decisively. The victory wasn't just tactical, it was systemic. German military analyst Franz Kurowski, in his study of the Africa Corps, provides the Axis perspective. February 14th was the day we lost North Africa, though the fighting would continue for 3 more months. Rommel's aura of invincibility was shattered. Worse, the Americans had proven they could learn, adapt, and execute complex operations. From that day forward, every German commander knew, underestimate the Americans at your peril. The strategic implications unfolded over subsequent months. By May 1943, all Axis forces in North Africa had surrendered. Over 275,000 troops became prisoners. The victory opened the Mediterranean to Allied shipping, saved thousands of lives in shipping losses, and provided the springboard for the invasion of Sicily and Italy. None of it would have been possible if Patton hadn't stopped Rommel's momentum on that single February day. But there's a deeper lesson here that transcends military history. What Patton demonstrated on February 14th was the power of belief combined with preparation. He believed the Americans could defeat Rommel's veterans, but he didn't just believe it, he prepared for it with obsessive attention to detail. Every aspect of his plan, from the false intelligence to the positioning of forces to the timing of the attack, was calculated to maximize psychological and tactical impact. Consider the audacity. Patton had been in command for 21 days. Rommel had been fighting in North Africa for 2 years. By every conventional measure, Patton should have focused on rebuilding, retraining, and slowly restoring confidence. Instead, he immediately planned and executed an operation that required precise coordination, absolute secrecy, and perfect timing. The margin for error was razor thin. One mistake, one leak, one miscalculation, and his entire force would have been destroyed. When asked after the war why he had taken such a risk, Patton's response was characteristic. There is no such thing as a defensive victory. I could have spent 6 months training those men in a safe rear area, and they would have remained defeated soldiers. Or I could give them 1 day of proof that they could beat the Germans, and they would become conquerors. I chose conquest. The human cost of that choice is worth examining. American casualties on February 14th totaled 670 men, killed, wounded, or missing. Each one was someone's son, brother, or husband. Patton's critics, then and now, argue that a more cautious approach might have achieved similar results with fewer casualties. His defenders counter that cautious approaches in war rarely achieve anything except prolonged bloodshed. What cannot be disputed is the impact on those who survived. Veterans of the February 14th battle formed the core of units that would fight across Sicily, Italy, France, and Germany. They became the cadre who trained other units, spreading Patton's aggressive doctrine throughout the American army. Their confidence, born in that single day of combat, influenced every subsequent battle. In the final analysis, what Rommel wrote in his notes when Patton outsmarted his entire strategy reveals something profound about leadership, warfare, and human potential. Rommel, the master tactician, had been outthought by a commander who understood that battles are won before they're fought. In the minds of soldiers, in the quality of intelligence, in the boldness of conception. The Desert Fox had built his reputation on doing the unexpected. Patton beat him by being even more unexpected. Rommel relied on the mistakes of his opponents. Patton gave him false information designed to encourage mistakes. Rommel counted on speed and violence of action. Patton delivered both in greater measure. It was a masterclass in the principle that in war, as in life, the student can become the master. If you found this deep dive into military history fascinating, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss another video. Give this video a like if you appreciate the research that goes into uncovering these untold stories. And please, share this with any history enthusiast you know. These stories deserve to be remembered and understood. Leave a comment and let me know, what other battles or commanders should we explore? The research never stops, and your suggestions shape future videos. Remember this as you navigate your own challenges. Sometimes the impossible is just something nobody's tried yet. Patton faced an impossible situation, a beaten army, an undefeated opponent, and 3 weeks to prepare. He didn't see impossibility. He saw opportunity. That mindset, that absolute refusal to accept defeat before the battle begins, is what separates those who make history from those who merely witness it. The Desert Fox met his match on February 14, 1943, not because American equipment was superior, though it helped, not because American troops were more experienced, they weren't, but because one commander refused to fight the battle everyone expected and instead created the conditions for a victory no one thought possible. That's the lesson Rommel learned that day. That's what he wrote in his notes. And that's why, 80 years later, we're still talking about what happened when these two military geniuses finally faced each other across a desert battlefield, and the impossible became inevitable.